2 days before Christmas, a kind-hearted nurse bought a simple gift for a little boy who had almost nothing. But what happened next? It changed her life forever. Was it fate, a miracle, or something else? Stay tuned to discover the incredible twist in this heartfelt story. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring tales. The snow blanketed Asheville, North Carolina, transforming the small town into a picturesque winter wonderland. Christmas lights twinkled on lampposts, and cheerful wreaths adorned the doors of local businesses. Despite the holiday spirit enveloping the town, the atmosphere inside Asheville Community Hospital was somber. For Rachel Morgan, the head nurse of the pediatric ward, Christmas was just another day of work. Rachel adjusted the straps of her face mask and glanced at the clock. It was nearly 7 p.m., and her shift had stretched longer than expected. She paused outside room 207, a place she visited frequently. Inside was Nathan Rivera, an 8-year-old boy with soulful brown eyes and a quiet demeanor. Diagnosed with a rare congenital heart condition, Nathan had been in and out of the hospital for much of the year. Rachel entered the room with a smile. "Good evening, Nathan," she greeted, her voice warm and soothing. Nathan looked up from the small toy car he was holding. The car was chipped and faded, clearly well-loved but long past its prime. "Hi, Nurse Rachel," he replied softly, his voice barely louder than a whisper. She knelt beside his bed. "How are you feeling today?" Nathan shrugged. "Okay, I guess." Rachel's heart ached. She had grown fond of the boy during his stay. He was polite, sweet, and wise beyond his years. But his eyes held a sadness that no child should bear, especially during the holidays. "What's that you've got there?" Rachel gestured to the toy car. Nathan held it out. "This was my dad's. He gave it to me before he left." Rachel nodded, sensing the weight behind his words. Nathan's father had passed away years ago, and his mother, struggling with her own grief, had been unable to visit often. "Do you like cars?" she asked, trying to lighten the mood. Nathan nodded. "Yeah, I used to have a whole collection, but this one's my favorite." He hesitated before adding, "It's the only one I have left." Rachel swallowed hard, willing herself to stay composed. She reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "You're such a brave kid, Nathan." Nathan smiled faintly, but his gaze drifted to the small Christmas tree in the corner of the room. Its ornaments were sparse, and its lights flickered unevenly. "I don't need presents," he said suddenly, his voice trembling. "I just want my mom to come back. That's all I want for Christmas." Rachel froze, her heart breaking for the little boy. She wanted to promise him the world, but she knew some wishes were beyond her ability to grant. Instead, she whispered, "You're not alone, Nathan. We're all here for you." Nathan's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and he clutched his toy car a little tighter. Rachel stayed by his side a little longer, chatting about his favorite car models and the stories he loved to imagine. But as she left the room that night, his words lingered in her mind. "I just want my mom to come back." The drive home that evening was accompanied by the steady hum of the heater in Rachel Morgan's car. Outside, snowflakes swirled in the glow of streetlights, creating a serene, almost magical scene. But Rachel's thoughts were far from peaceful. Nathan's words echoed in her mind. "I just want my mom to come back." Rachel tightened her grip on the steering wheel as a memory from her own childhood surfaced. She was 8 years old, just like Nathan, and sitting on the worn-out couch in her family's tiny apartment. Her mother had just come home after a double shift at the diner. Even with dark circles under her eyes and exhaustion evident in every movement, her mom had managed a warm smile. "What's wrong, honey?" her mother had asked, noticing Rachel's downcast expression. "I don't think Santa's coming this year," Rachel had replied, trying to sound brave but failing to hold back her tears. Her mom had knelt in front of her, taking Rachel's hands in her own. "Santa always comes," she had whispered. "Sometimes he just needs a little help." The next morning, Rachel had woken up to find a second-hand doll waiting for her under their small, crooked Christmas tree. She had hugged the doll tightly, overwhelmed by the love and effort her mother had put into making her feel special. The memory brought a bittersweet smile to Rachel's face as she pulled up to a red light. Her mother had always found a way to make her children feel valued, no matter how little they had. That was what Nathan deserved too, a reminder that someone cared deeply for him. The light turned green, and Rachel continued down the quiet, snow-lined streets. As she passed the town's main square, something caught her eye. A small toy store with a festive display in the window. Among the array of stuffed animals and brightly wrapped boxes, a shiny red toy car stood out. It looked remarkably like the one Nathan had described in his stories. Rachel pulled into the parking lot almost instinctively. She hesitated for a moment, staring at the glowing "Open" sign. Hospital regulations were clear. Staff were not allowed to give personal gifts to patients. It was a policy designed to maintain fairness and avoid favoritism. Yet, as Rachel sat there, the image of Nathan's hopeful smile filled her mind. "Rules or no rules," she muttered under her breath. "Sometimes people just need to feel seen." She pushed open the car door and stepped into the store, the bell above the door jingling softly. The shop was small but cozy, with shelves stacked high with toys of all kinds. An elderly man stood behind the counter, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he read a newspaper. "Evening, miss," he greeted without looking up. "Let me know if you need any help." Rachel wandered through the aisles, her eyes scanning the rows of toys until she found it, the red car. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its sleek design almost daring her to pick it up. She turned it over in her hands, imagining Nathan's face lighting up when he saw it. "How much is this?" she asked, approaching the counter. The man glanced at the car and smiled. "That one's on sale. $5. You've got good taste. Kids love that model." Rachel handed him a bill and tucked the car into her bag. As she stepped back into the cold night air, she felt a pang of guilt. She knew the risks, knew this could jeopardize her career if anyone found out. But as she climbed into her car and placed the toy gently on the passenger seat, a sense of resolve washed over her. "Sometimes rules need to bend," she whispered to herself. "A small gift can't hurt, can it?" The thought lingered as she drove home, the weight of her decision settling heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a toy. It was a symbol of hope for a little boy who desperately needed it. As she parked in front of her apartment building, she glanced once more at the toy car. The soft glow of the dashboard lights illuminated it, making it seem almost magical. "Maybe this is what Santa looks like," she thought with a wry smile. But as she turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, another thought crept in. What if this backfires? Rachel shook her head, trying to push away the doubt. She carried the bag inside, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. But even as she settled into bed that night, she couldn't ignore the question echoing in her mind. The pediatric ward was unusually quiet that Christmas Eve night. Most of the young patients were either asleep or engrossed in the twinkling lights of the small Christmas tree stationed at the end of the hall. Rachel Morgan moved silently through the corridors, her white sneakers barely making a sound on the polished floors. In her hand was a small gift bag. Inside was the red toy car she had purchased the night before, Nathan's Christmas miracle, wrapped in shiny silver paper. She paused outside room 207, peeking through the narrow window. Nathan was fast asleep, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm, his small hands clutching the old, battered toy car he held onto so dearly. Rachel pushed open the door cautiously, the soft creak of the hinges making her wince. She tiptoed to his bedside, her heart racing. Placing the gift on the nightstand next to him, she hesitated for a moment. Was she doing the right thing? The hospital's policies echoed in her mind, stern and unyielding. But then she looked at Nathan's peaceful face and knew some rules were meant to be broken. "Merry Christmas, Nathan," she whispered, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. She lingered for a moment before slipping out of the room, leaving the gift waiting to be discovered. The next morning, the ward buzzed with subdued energy. Parents and staff exchanged holiday greetings while the children chattered about their Christmas wishes. When Rachel returned to work, she headed straight to room 207, eager to see Nathan's reaction. She found him sitting upright in bed, the red toy car held triumphantly in his hands. His face lit up with pure joy, his smile wide and infectious. "Nurse Rachel!" he exclaimed, his voice louder than she had ever heard it before. "Look, Santa came!" Rachel's chest tightened, her emotions swirling between joy and guilt. "That's amazing, Nathan. Santa must have known just how special you are." Nathan nodded enthusiastically. "This is the best Christmas ever," he declared, his happiness filling the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. As the day went on, word of Nathan's mysterious gift spread throughout the ward. Other children peeked into his room to see the shiny new car, their faces lighting up as he proudly showed it off. For a while, the hospital didn't feel like a place of sickness, but rather a haven of hope and joy. Later that afternoon, Rachel was restocking supplies when her coworker Emily entered the room. Emily was a kind but pragmatic nurse who followed the rules to the letter. She looked at Rachel with a mixture of concern and caution. "Rachel," Emily began, her tone low but firm, "did you have anything to do with Nathan's gift?" Rachel froze, her hand hovering over a stack of gauze. "Why do you ask?" "Look, I get it," Emily said, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "He's a sweet kid, and you have a big heart. But you know the hospital's policy. If anyone finds out, you could be in serious trouble." Rachel sighed, leaning against the counter. "Emily, have you seen him today? He's so happy. For once, he doesn't feel like just another sick kid stuck in a hospital." "I know," Emily admitted, her voice softening. "But rules are rules, Rachel. And if someone higher up hears about this..." She trailed off, leaving the unspoken consequences hanging in the air. Rachel nodded reluctantly. "I understand, Emily, but sometimes doing the right thing isn't the same as following the rules." Emily gave her a look that was equal parts admiration and worry before leaving the room. That evening, Rachel was checking the monitors in the hallway when a voice behind her made her stomach drop. "Rachel," it said, sharp and authoritative. She turned slowly to see Claire Monroe, the hospital's director, standing with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Rachel's heart sank. "Miss Monroe," she stammered. Claire interrupted, her tone cutting. "I need to speak with you, now." Rachel swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had hoped to fly under the radar, to let Nathan's happiness overshadow the risks she had taken. But now, as she followed Claire toward her office, the weight of her decision bore down on her like never before. The sterile walls of the hospital office corridor seemed to close in around Rachel as she followed Claire Monroe. Each step echoed ominously, amplifying her growing sense of dread. Rachel's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to keep her head high. Whatever Claire had to say, Rachel would face it. Once inside the director's office, Claire gestured for Rachel to sit. The room was impeccably organized, with certificates and accolades adorning the walls, symbols of the hospital's prestige and reputation. Claire took a seat behind her imposing mahogany desk and folded her hands, her sharp eyes fixed on Rachel. "Rachel," Claire began, her tone calm but edged with authority, "do you know why you're here?" Rachel swallowed hard. "I assume it has to do with Nathan's Christmas gift," Claire nodded. "It's come to my attention that you left a personal gift in one of our patients' rooms. Is that correct?" Rachel hesitated but decided there was no point in lying. "Yes, I did," she admitted. "But it wasn't about breaking rules. It was about making a child feel special during the holidays." Claire leaned back in her chair, studying Rachel. "I appreciate your sentiment, but this isn't just about one child. This hospital operates under strict policies for a reason. Personal gifts can create perceptions of favoritism, and worse, they can compromise the trust our donors have in our professionalism." "Favoritism," Rachel repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Nathan is an 8-year-old boy spending Christmas in a hospital room, battling a condition most adults couldn't handle. All I wanted was to bring him a little joy." Claire's expression didn't soften. "I don't doubt your intentions, Rachel. But the hospital isn't just about the patients. It's also about maintaining relationships with donors and sponsors. Actions like yours, no matter how well-meaning, can create issues that ripple far beyond room 207. Rachel felt a wave of frustration rising in her chest. "So we're more worried about what the donors think than about the happiness of a sick child?" Claire's gaze hardened. "That's not fair, and you know it. We're here to provide care within a system, Rachel. A system that requires structure and adherence to policy. Without that structure, we risk losing the resources that allow us to help children like Nathan." The words hit Rachel like a slap. She had always believed in putting patients first, but hearing Claire frame the situation as a balancing act between compassion and practicality made her feel trapped. "I understand the rules," Rachel said, her voice quieter now. "But sometimes they don't account for what's right. Nathan doesn't need bureaucracy. He needs hope." Claire sighed and leaned forward, her elbows resting on the desk. "Rachel, I admire your dedication, truly. But this isn't the first time you've bent the rules to prioritize your patients. And while I respect your passion, it's becoming a pattern that the hospital cannot ignore." Rachel's stomach churned. "Are you saying I'm being reprimanded?" I'm saying this is your final warning, Claire replied, her tone unyielding. If anything like this happens again, you will be asked to leave. I can't afford to make exceptions, not even for you. The words hung heavy in the air. Rachel clenched her fists under the desk, her mind racing. She wanted to defend herself, to argue that compassion should always outweigh red tape, but she knew Claire had made up her mind. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Claire asked, breaking the silence. Rachel met Claire's gaze, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Only that I would do it again if it meant giving Nathan a reason to smile. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stood, signaling that the meeting was over. I suggest you take some time to reflect, Rachel. You're an excellent nurse, but excellence means nothing without accountability. Rachel nodded curtly and rose from her chair. Thank you for your time, Miss Monroe. As she left the office, Rachel felt the weight of Claire's words pressing down on her. The joy she had felt earlier that day, seeing Nathan's face light up, now felt like a distant memory. She walked back to the pediatric ward in a haze, her thoughts a tangle of frustration, guilt, and defiance. By the time she reached the hallway outside Nathan's room, Rachel had made a decision. No matter what Claire or the hospital thought, she wouldn't let their rules stop her from doing what was right. But for now, she would have to tread carefully. The hum of conversation filled the hospital break room as Rachel poured herself a cup of lukewarm coffee. The day had been unusually tense, and she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was whispering behind her back. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and froze. A social media post with a photo of Nathan holding the red toy car stared back at her. The caption read, "Sometimes bending the rules brings a little magic. A nurse at Asheville Community Hospital gives a young patient a Christmas to remember." Rachel's heart sank as she read through the growing list of comments. Some praised her kindness, calling her an angel for thinking of the boy's happiness. Others, however, weren't as kind. If she can't follow basic policies, how can we trust her with patient care? Rules exist for a reason. What's next? Playing favorites with meds? The post had gone viral, and the hospital's name was plastered across every comment thread. Rachel's stomach churned. She hadn't anticipated her gesture becoming public, much less igniting a firestorm of debate. By the time Rachel returned to the pediatric ward, the tension was palpable. Nurses and doctors avoided her gaze, and whispers followed her every step. As she entered the nurse's station, Emily, the co-worker who had warned her earlier, approached with a concerned expression. "Rachel," Emily began, lowering her voice. "Have you seen the post?" Rachel nodded, her voice tight. "I have. I don't know who took that picture or why they thought it was a good idea to post it." Emily sighed. "It's causing a stir. The hospital board is meeting about it as we speak." Rachel's chest tightened. "I didn't do this for attention, Emily. I did it for Nathan." "I know," Emily said, her tone softening. "But not everyone sees it that way. You need to be careful." Before Rachel could respond, a loud voice echoed from behind them. "Careful? That's putting it lightly." Rachel turned to see Mark, a senior nurse with a reputation for being by the book, standing with his arms crossed. "Do you have any idea the kind of pressure this puts on the hospital?" he demanded. "Donors are already questioning our professionalism." "You may have meant well, Rachel, but your actions have consequences." Rachel bristled at his tone. "I didn't ask for this to go viral, Mark, and I certainly didn't mean to cause trouble." "But you did," Mark shot back. "This isn't about you or even about Nathan. It's about the hospital's integrity. If everyone started bending the rules for their favorite patients, where would it end?" The argument was cut short by the sound of a patient's bell. Rachel excused herself, grateful for the distraction, and hurried to Nathan's room. When she arrived, she found him sitting cross-legged on his bed, playing with the red car. His joy was contagious, and for a moment Rachel felt a sense of calm, but the peace was short-lived. As Rachel checked his vitals, an elderly patient from the adjacent room appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Henderson, a regular in the ward, was known for her bluntness. "Excuse me, Nurse Rachel," she said, her tone polite but firm. "Can I ask you something?" Rachel turned, offering a small smile. "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. What's on your mind?" The older woman stepped closer, her gaze serious. "I heard about what you did for the boy. It's a kind thing, truly. But what if it causes more harm than good? What if bending the rules sets a precedent no one can control?" Rachel faltered, unsure how to respond. "I understand your concern," she said carefully. But sometimes following the rules to the letter means neglecting what matters most. Mrs. Henderson tilted her head. And who decides what matters most? You, the hospital, or the system we all rely on? Rachel opened her mouth to respond but stopped. She didn't have an answer, not one that would satisfy everyone. As Mrs. Henderson turned to leave, her parting words lingered like an echo in Rachel's mind. Kindness is a gift, Rachel, but gifts can carry burdens too. Back at the nurses' station, Rachel found herself scrolling through the comments on the viral post again. The arguments were relentless, the voices louder than ever. For every person praising her actions, another questioned her judgment. The weight of the scrutiny felt suffocating. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Emily. "The director wants to see you, now." Rachel exhaled shakily, her heart pounding. She didn't know what awaited her in Claire Monroe's office this time. But one thing was clear: the stakes had never been higher. The sun was beginning to set over Asheville, casting a warm, golden glow through the large hospital windows. Rachel stood at the nurses' station, flipping through Nathan's medical chart, when a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, Nurse Morgan?" Rachel looked up to see Carlos Rivera, Nathan's father, standing hesitantly near the station. He held his hat in his hands, his face etched with weariness and something deeper: gratitude. "Mr. Rivera," Rachel greeted, smiling warmly. "How can I help you?" Carlos glanced around before stepping closer. I needed to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything you've done for Nathan." Rachel tilted her head, a bit taken aback. "It's my job to care for him, Mr. Rivera. He's an incredible boy." Carlos shook his head, his grip tightening on the brim of his hat. "No, it's more than that. You didn't just care for him, you gave him hope. That toy car, it's all he's talked about since Christmas morning." Rachel felt a pang of relief and guilt at the same time. "I'm glad it brought him joy," she said softly. Carlos took a deep breath, his eyes glistening. "You know, after his mother passed, it's been hard for Nathan to find joy in anything. It's been hard for both of us." Rachel's heart sank. She hadn't known much about Nathan's family, and hearing this made her feel the weight of their struggle. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, her voice gentle. "That must have been incredibly difficult for you both." Carlos nodded, his gaze distant. "Maria was the heart of our family. She could make the hardest days seem bearable, always finding a way to make Nathan smile. When she got sick, she fought so hard to stay with us, but cancer doesn't play fair." Rachel listened intently, her chest tightening with empathy. Carlos's voice wavered as he continued. "After we lost her, I wasn't sure how to keep going. Nathan, he's been my anchor, but I've seen the sadness in his eyes every day since she's been gone." Carlos paused, taking a shaky breath. "And then on Christmas morning he woke up and saw that gift. For the first time in years, I saw the light in his eyes again. You didn't just give him a toy, Nurse Morgan. You gave him something I thought we'd lost forever. You gave us hope." Rachel felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She placed a reassuring hand on Carlos's arm. "Nathan's resilience is inspiring, Mr. Rivera. He has so much strength, and so do you." Carlos looked down at her hand, his expression softening. "Strength," he repeated, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's not always easy to feel strong, but when someone like you steps in, it reminds us that we're not alone." As the two spoke, the hall grew quieter. Rachel could sense the vulnerability in Carlos's words, the depth of his gratitude. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had chosen this career, despite its challenges. "I don't know what the hospital's rules are," Carlos said, his voice firmer now. "But I need you to know this. You didn't just help Nathan. You saved me. Because when I see him happy, even for a moment, it gives me the strength to keep going." Rachel felt her throat tighten. "Thank you, Mr. Rivera. That means more than I can say." Carlos reached out and gently took her hand in his. "No, thank you. For giving my son a piece of his childhood back. For reminding me that there's still good in the world." For a moment, they stood in silence, the connection between them unspoken but deeply understood. Rachel felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to fight for what truly mattered, no matter the obstacles. The moment was interrupted by the soft chime of Rachel's pager. She glanced down and saw a message from Emily. "The director wants to meet again. Urgent." Rachel's stomach dropped. She gave Carlos an apologetic smile. I need to go, but please don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. Carlos nodded, his gratitude evident in his eyes. Of course. And Nurse Morgan, don't let anyone tell you that what you did was wrong. Rachel nodded, his words echoing in her mind as she turned to leave. As she walked toward Claire Monroe's office once more, she couldn't help but wonder what awaited her, and whether she was prepared to face it. The lobby of Asheville Community Hospital was unusually bustling that morning, but Rachel barely noticed as she made her way to the small cafe nestled in a quiet corner. She'd been summoned for a meeting, though the sender of the invitation had been a complete mystery until now. As she approached the reserved table, a tall, distinguished man in his late 60s stood to greet her. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he carried an air of quiet authority. "Miss Morgan?" he asked, extending his hand. "Yes," Rachel replied cautiously, shaking his hand. "And you are?" "Gerald Whitman," he said with a warm smile. "I believe we have a lot to discuss." Rachel's eyes widened in recognition. Gerald Whitman was a household name, a renowned philanthropist whose foundation had transformed the lives of countless children across the country. After they sat down, Gerald wasted no time getting to the point. "I read the article about you," he began, folding his hands on the table. "The one about the toy car and Nathan Rivera. It struck a chord with me." Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't intend for that story to become public." Gerald chuckled. "That's often how the most genuine acts of kindness come to light. Unintentionally." His expression grew serious. "But your story reminded me of something from my past. May I share it with you?" Rachel nodded, intrigued. Gerald's voice softened as he spoke. "Many years ago, my wife and I lost our son, Ethan. He was 8 years old, just like Nathan, and he loved cars too. Ethan had leukemia, and despite our best efforts, we couldn't save him." Rachel's heart clenched. She could see the pain in Gerald's eyes as he relived the memories. "It broke us," Gerald continued, his voice trembling slightly. "But in the years that followed, we decided to channel our grief into something meaningful. That's when we founded the Whitman Children's Foundation. Our goal was simple: to ensure that no child, and no parent, would ever feel as helpless as we did." Rachel listened intently, her admiration for Gerald growing with each word. "I've been following your story closely, Miss Morgan," Gerald said, leaning forward, "and I believe you're exactly the kind of person we need. Someone who isn't afraid to bend the rules when it means doing what's right." Rachel blinked, taken aback. "I'm not sure what you mean." Gerald smiled knowingly. "I want you to join our foundation. Specifically, I'd like you to lead a new initiative we're launching, an outreach program focused on bringing joy and hope to hospitalized children across the country." Rachel's breath caught. "Lead the initiative?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Gerald said firmly. "Your compassion, your drive, these are qualities we can't teach. And they're exactly what this program needs." For a moment, Rachel was silent, her mind racing. The offer was incredible, but it also felt overwhelming. "Mr. Whitman," she began hesitantly, "I'm just a nurse. I've never managed anything like this before." "That's exactly why you're the right person for the job," Gerald countered. "You understand these children on a level most people never will. You don't see them as cases or statistics, you see them as individuals. That perspective is invaluable." Rachel looked down at her hands, still unsure. "I'm flattered, truly, but this feels so far out of my depth." Gerald leaned back, studying her thoughtfully. "Let me ask you this. Why did you become a nurse?" Rachel didn't have to think long. "To help people," she said simply. "To make a difference." "And you have," Gerald said. "But imagine the difference you could make on a larger scale. This isn't just about one child or one toy car. It's about creating moments of hope for countless children and their families." Rachel's emotions swirled as she considered his words. The weight of responsibility loomed large, but so did the potential impact. Could she really take on such a monumental task? Gerald must have sensed her hesitation because he leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Miss Morgan," he said, his tone gentle but firm, "if you turn this down, I don't know who else I can trust with it. You are the heart and soul this program needs." Rachel's breath hitched at the weight of his statement. She looked up at Gerald, searching his face for any hint of doubt, but found none. His confidence in her was unwavering. As silence stretched between them, Rachel felt the magnitude of the decision before her. Was she ready to step into a role that could change her life, and the lives of so many others? Rachel stared at the skyline of Asheville from the hospital's rooftop terrace, her mind racing. Gerald Whitman's offer was a golden opportunity, a chance to bring hope to children far beyond the walls of this hospital. But it came with a price. If she accepted, she would have to leave behind the patients who relied on her, especially Nathan. Her thoughts drifted to the little boy's wide eyes lighting up when he saw the toy car on Christmas morning. It wasn't just about the gift, it was about the connection they had built. Could she abandon that? Could she turn her back on the familiar halls of the hospital, the place where she had spent so many years? Later that evening, Rachel sat in the staff lounge nursing a cup of lukewarm tea. The weight of her decision was almost too much to bear. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice someone entering until a voice startled her. "Rachel Morgan, as I live and breathe." She looked up to see Mike Green, an old colleague and one of the few people who truly understood her. "Mike!" she exclaimed, rising to greet him. The two shared a quick hug before sitting down to catch up. Mike had left the hospital years ago to pursue a career in community outreach, but he had always stayed in touch. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders," Mike said, his brow furrowing. Rachel sighed. "I might be." Mike leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Rachel hesitated before spilling everything: Gerald's offer, her fears, her doubts. Mike listened intently, his face a mix of curiosity and concern. When she finished, he leaned back and crossed his arms. "Wow, that's a lot." "Tell me about it," Rachel muttered. Mike was silent for a moment, then said, "Rachel, do you remember why I left the hospital?" She nodded. "You wanted to make a bigger impact." "Exactly," Mike said, "and I did. Don't get me wrong, working here was rewarding, but stepping into a role where I could affect entire communities, that was life-changing, not just for them, but for me." Rachel looked down at her hands, her thoughts churning. "But what about the patients here? What about Nathan? How can I just walk away from them?" Mike placed a hand on hers. "You're not walking away from them. You're walking toward something bigger, something that can help even more people. And trust me, Rachel, the work you've done here will stay with them, just like it'll stay with you." Mike's words lingered in Rachel's mind as she drove home that night. His journey had been different from hers, but the parallels were undeniable. Could she really follow in his footsteps? As she parked her car in front of her small house, Rachel noticed the light in her living room flickering. She stepped inside and collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. She thought about Nathan, about Gerald, about all the children she might be able to help if she took the leap. The next morning, Rachel found herself back at the hospital, walking through the pediatric wing. She paused outside Nathan's room, watching him sleep. His small chest rose and fell steadily, the toy car still clutched in his tiny hand. The sight brought tears to her eyes. Leaving him felt impossible, but Mike's voice echoed in her mind. "You're walking towards something bigger." Rachel gripped the edge of the doorframe, torn between two worlds. Her heart ached with the weight of her indecision. As she walked away, Rachel whispered to herself, "Can I really do this? Can I leave behind everything I've known to chase something unknown?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as she made her way to the elevator. Rachel sat at the long mahogany table in the conference room, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. Surrounding her were the faces of influential donors, each a significant figure in the community. Gerald Whitman stood to her right, a pillar of support amid the tension that filled the room. The conversation was heated. Rachel had just presented her vision for the children's outreach program, emphasizing the transformative impact it could have on young lives. But not everyone in the room shared her enthusiasm. "We need more specifics," barked Charles Draper, a well-known entrepreneur who had been the hospital's largest donor for over a decade. "How do you plan to sustain this program? Passion is admirable, Miss Morgan, but passion alone won't fund a project of this scale." Rachel took a deep breath, forcing herself to maintain composure. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Draper. The budget includes partnerships with local organizations and community volunteers to minimize overhead costs. And," she paused, looking him directly in the eye, "this isn't just about money, it's about hope. These children need more than treatment, they need opportunities." Her words hung in the air, met with murmurs of both agreement and dissent. Gerald stepped forward, his commanding presence drawing the room's attention. "Charles," he said firmly, "we've seen Rachel's dedication firsthand. She's already proven what she can do with limited resources. Imagine what she could achieve with our full support." Draper leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "That's all well and good, Gerald. But what about her other commitments? How can she lead this project effectively while still tied to the hospital?" Rachel felt her heart sink. This was the moment she had dreaded. She glanced at Gerald, who gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. "Mr. Draper," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "My work at the hospital has been my life's mission, but this project represents something bigger. If it means I have to step away from my position to ensure its success, then that's what I'll do." The room fell silent. The weight of her words seemed to settle over everyone present. As the meeting progressed, the questions grew sharper, the scrutiny more intense. But Rachel stood her ground, answering each query with unwavering conviction. For every doubt raised, she offered a solution. For every criticism, a counterpoint. Yet she couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. Finally, Draper leaned forward, his sharp gaze fixed on her. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice low but pointed, "are you truly prepared to sacrifice everything, your career, your stability, for the sake of this cause?" Rachel hesitated, her mind racing. Images of Nathan, Carlos, and the countless children who could benefit from this program flashed before her eyes. Could she really give up the life she had built for something so uncertain? Before she could answer, Gerald interjected, his tone calm but resolute. "Rachel's actions have already spoken louder than words. She's willing to do whatever it takes. That's the kind of leader this project needs." As the meeting concluded, Rachel felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The donors had agreed to move forward, but it was clear that their faith in the project hinged entirely on her commitment. As she walked out of the conference room, Draper stopped her. "Rachel," he said, his voice softer now, "I may not agree with your methods, but I respect your resolve. Just remember, this isn't about proving yourself. It's about the kids." Rachel nodded, her chest tight with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Draper. I won't let them, or you, down." Later that evening, Rachel found herself alone in the hospital chapel, the faint glow of candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. She sank into a pew, her mind replaying the day's events. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her, yet somewhere beneath the doubt was a flicker of hope. She whispered into the stillness, "Am I really ready to give up everything for this?" The sound of the chapel door creaking open interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Gerald standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I thought you might be here," he said, taking a seat beside her. "You did well today, Rachel." "Did I?" she replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I feel like I've just signed away my entire life." Gerald smiled gently. "Sometimes the biggest sacrifices lead to the greatest rewards. You'll see." Rachel looked down at her hands, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. Could she truly rise to the challenge? Was she prepared to let go of everything she knew to embrace the unknown? As Gerald left, Rachel remained in the quiet chapel, the question still lingering in her mind. She closed her eyes, searching for clarity. When she finally stood to leave, her resolve had strengthened, but so had her doubts. "Am I ready?" she whispered to herself as she stepped into the cold night air. The day had finally arrived. The hospital's atrium was unrecognizable, transformed into a festive wonderland adorned with twinkling lights, garlands, and a towering Christmas tree. Volunteers bustled around, arranging tables piled with gifts and donation boxes. At the center of it all was Rachel, her heart racing with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. She glanced at the banner hanging above the stage, Nathan's gift, spreading hope to all children. The project she had poured her soul into was finally coming to life. Nathan sat in his wheelchair near the stage, his face glowing with excitement. He wore a bright red sweater with a snowflake pattern, his fragile frame dwarfed by the festive decor. Rachel crouched beside him, adjusting his scarf. "Nathan," she said with a smile, "you're the star today. Ready to make your debut?" The boy nodded eagerly, clutching a small note card in his hand. "Do you think people will like my speech, Miss Rachel?" "They'll love it," she assured him. "Just speak from your heart." As the event began, a small crowd of patients, hospital staff, and donors gathered. Gerald Whitman stepped onto the stage to deliver opening remarks. His voice resonated with authority, but his words carried warmth as he praised Rachel's vision and dedication. "Rachel Morgan has shown us what it truly means to care," Gerald said, gesturing toward her. This project is a testament to her unwavering belief that every child deserves hope, no matter their circumstances. Applause erupted, and Rachel felt a blush creep up her cheeks. But this wasn't about her. It was about the children, especially Nathan. Nathan's moment arrived. Rachel wheeled him to the microphone, whispering a few encouraging words before stepping back. The room fell silent as the young boy looked out at the crowd, his small hands trembling slightly. "My name is Nathan Rivera," he began, his voice soft but steady. "A few months ago, I thought Christmas would be just another lonely day in the hospital. But Miss Rachel showed me that miracles can happen. This project isn't just about gifts, it's about love." The room erupted in applause, and Rachel wiped away a tear. She had never been more proud. After Nathan's speech, Rachel mingled with the crowd, her heart swelling with gratitude as she witnessed the joy around her. Parents thanked her for the gifts their children received, and doctors expressed their admiration for her courage in launching the project. Amid the celebration, Claire Monroe, the hospital's director, approached Rachel. Her usual stern demeanor was replaced with a softer expression. "Rachel," Claire began, her voice uncharacteristically gentle, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to doubt you. This is extraordinary." Rachel blinked in surprise. She had never expected such words from Claire. "Thank you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It means a lot coming from you." Claire nodded, then added with a wry smile, "But don't think this means I'll go easy on you next time." The two women laughed, the tension that once defined their relationship dissolving into mutual respect. As the event wound down, Rachel found herself sitting beside Nathan once more. The boy was beaming, his eyes sparkling with happiness. "Miss Rachel," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "you're my Christmas miracle." Rachel felt her heart ache with love and gratitude. "No, Nathan," she whispered, holding his hand tightly. "You're mine." The evening ended with the lighting of the Christmas tree. As the crowd counted down, Rachel looked around, taking in the faces of those whose lives had been touched by the project. The lights flickered to life, casting a warm glow over the atrium, and for the first time in months, Rachel felt a profound sense of peace. She knew this was just the beginning. The journey had been far from easy, but it had led her here, to a place of true change, not just for the children, but for herself. The day had come to officially launch Nathan's Gift, the charitable foundation that Rachel and Gerald had tirelessly worked on for months. The community center hall was brimming with attendees, donors, families, volunteers, and hospital staff. The air buzzed with anticipation, mingled with the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee and holiday cookies. Rachel stood backstage, smoothing out the creases of her modest navy dress. She clutched her speech notes in one hand, her heart pounding against her ribcage. The weight of the moment was palpable, not just for her, but for Nathan, Gerald, and every child this foundation was meant to support. As Gerald introduced her to the stage, Rachel stepped forward, greeted by a warm wave of applause. She took a moment to survey the crowd. Among them, she spotted Nathan with his father, his beaming smile a constant source of strength. Rachel adjusted the microphone and began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to stand here today, surrounded by so many incredible people who believe in the power of hope and kindness. Tonight isn't about me. It's about a little boy named Nathan who taught me that even the smallest gestures can spark the biggest changes." Her voice broke slightly and she paused to collect herself. "When I first met Nathan, he was a boy fighting for his life, longing for the return of joy. What began as a small Christmas gift to brighten his day has grown into something I could never have imagined, a chance to bring that same light to countless children like him." The audience was riveted. Rachel recounted the journey that had brought them here, weaving stories of hope, resilience, and the power of community. She spoke about the families she had met along the way, stories that had fueled her passion to make this dream a reality. Just as she was about to conclude, Gerald reappeared on stage with a surprise announcement. He introduced the Lopez family, one of the first beneficiaries of the foundation. Maria Lopez, a young mother with tired eyes and a quiet strength, stepped forward holding her toddler's hand. Fighting back tears, she shared her story of hardship, how the foundation had provided her daughter with life-saving treatment when all seemed lost. "I can't thank you enough, Miss Rachel," Maria said, her voice trembling. "You didn't just help my daughter. You gave my family hope when we thought there was none left." The room fell silent, save for the soft sniffles of attendees moved by Maria's heartfelt gratitude. Rachel felt tears prick her own eyes as she stepped forward to embrace Maria. As the event came to a close, Rachel prepared for her final words. She looked down at Nathan, his wide eyes filled with admiration, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. "This foundation isn't just about giving gifts or helping in moments of crisis," Rachel said, her voice resolute. "It's about building a legacy, a promise that no child will ever feel alone in their struggles. Together, we can make that promise a reality." The crowd erupted into applause, standing in unison to honor the work that had been done. Gerald whispered a quiet, "Well done," as he stood beside her, the pride evident in his eyes. As the attendees began to disperse, Rachel stepped off the stage, only to be approached by an older gentleman with kind, weathered features. He extended a hand, his voice soft but sincere. "Miss Rachel," he said, "I just wanted you to know, you've changed our lives. My granddaughter was one of the first children helped by Nathan's gift. I don't know how we would have managed without you." Rachel's heart swelled as she shook his hand. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she replied. "It's families like yours that remind me why we do this." Later that evening, Rachel found herself sitting quietly beside Nathan and his father. The boy rested his head on her shoulder, his small hand clutching hers tightly. "You're really amazing, Miss Rachel," Nathan murmured. "You made this happen." Rachel smiled down at him, her heart full. "No, Nathan. You're the amazing one. You're the reason all of this is possible." The boy's response was simple but profound. "You're my hero." Rachel didn't reply, letting the weight of his words settle in. She knew this was just the beginning. The foundation was no longer just an idea. It was a movement, a legacy that would outlive them all. The first light of Christmas morning filtered through the hospital windows, casting a warm glow over the bustling hallway. Rachel walked into the pediatric ward, her arms filled with small gifts for the children. The night before had been a flurry of preparation for the foundation's next steps, but today she allowed herself to simply celebrate the magic of the season. As she entered Nathan's room, the boy greeted her with his usual bright smile. Despite the monitors and tubes that surrounded him, Nathan exuded an undeniable joy that seemed to light up the entire room. "Merry Christmas, Miss Rachel," Nathan said, holding a piece of paper tightly in his small hands. Rachel crouched beside his bed, setting the gifts down on a nearby table. "Merry Christmas, Nathan. How are you feeling today?" Nathan nodded eagerly and extended the paper toward her. "I made this for you." Rachel unfolded the paper to reveal a colorful drawing of a Christmas tree, its branches adorned with ornaments that looked like tiny hearts. Beneath the tree were children, smiling and holding hands, their faces bright with happiness. At the top, written in shaky but deliberate letters, were the words, "Christmas Tree of Hope." "It's beautiful, Nathan," Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've outdone yourself." Nathan beamed with pride. "It's for the foundation," he explained, "so everyone knows what it's about, hope and kindness." Rachel's heart swelled as she looked at the drawing, realizing the profound impact Nathan's spirit had on her journey. She carefully placed the picture in her bag, making a mental note to frame it and display it at the foundation's office. Later that afternoon, Rachel found a quiet moment to open the mail that had piled up during the week. Among the usual correspondence, one envelope stood out. It was hand-addressed and sealed with a simple Christmas sticker. Curious, she opened it and began to read. The letter was from the Thompson family, who had recently received assistance through the foundation. They shared how the financial support had allowed them to afford crucial treatment for their son, who was now on the road to recovery. The letter ended with a heartfelt message. "Miss Rachel, your kindness has given us a second chance at life. Thank you for believing in families like ours. You've restored not just our hope, but our faith in humanity." Rachel sat back, letting the words sink in. She hadn't anticipated how deeply these moments of connection would touch her. This wasn't just about starting a foundation or helping one family. It was about creating ripples of change that would extend far beyond her. That evening, the hospital held a small Christmas gathering for the children and their families. Nathan's drawing was displayed prominently at the front of the room, surrounded by strings of twinkling lights. Parents exchanged stories, laughter filled the air, and Rachel felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As the festivities wound down, Nathan tugged at Rachel's sleeve. "Miss Rachel," he said softly, "I think you're like the Christmas tree in my drawing. You give hope to everyone." Rachel knelt beside him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Nathan, you're the real hero. You've reminded me why kindness matters so much." When Rachel returned home that night, she placed Nathan's drawing on her desk. It stood there as a reminder of the power of compassion and the extraordinary change it could bring. Looking at the vibrant colors and hopeful message, she whispered to herself, "Kindness has the power to change the world." The snow outside her window sparkled under the glow of Christmas lights, and Rachel knew this was just the beginning of an incredible journey. The foundation was growing, lives were being touched, and she was exactly where she was meant to be.